So, Spider-Man PS4 is Copaganda, apparently. This video in particular makes a lot of interesting claims, like how Spider-Man is a class traitor. Having replayed the game recently, in preparation for something you'll see later, I'm prepared to defend this game from the claim that it's Copaganda. Let's get into the video.
Part 2. Why Spidey is a class traitor.
Yeah, I know I'm skipping quite a bit here, but I want to jump into the claims made against the game, since that's when I have things to respond to.
Spider-Man PS4 really wants you to know that Spidey and the police are on the same side.
Well, that depends. Which police officers are we talking about? Surely not the corrupt ones on Fisk's payroll, or the captain who eventually started to abuse her power for violent revenge.
There's this ongoing bit throughout the game where Spidey pretends to be a character called Spider Cop, a gruff detective who doesn't play by the rules, but who gets the job done.
Not entirely sure the point of this, but I mean that's clearly a joke. It's a play on how Spider-Man narrates like he's in a movie or TV show to horse around with Yuri.
Yuri Watanabe, his contact within the NYPD throughout the game, is referred to as his partner, and they frequently assist one another.
Yeah, because he believed they were in it for the same cause. And by the end, Yuri's methods went too far, so they had a fallout. This really works against the idea that it's Copaganda.
When Spidey swings onto the roof of a police station to literally hack into their crime detection systems, and there happen to be cops nearby, they reassure him that they won't tell on him and they've got his back.
I'm not sure what this proves exactly.
Spidey works with cops multiple times throughout the game, and MJ even writes an article that unironically uses the term hero cop.
Well, because Jeff did a heroic thing. We literally see in the cutscene that he put his life on the line to help civilians. MJ's job is to write the truth, so she proceeded to write the truth.
The dialogue keeps insisting that some cops view Spider-Man as a menace, but to my memory, you meet all of one cop who actually behaves antagonistically towards Spidey. And of course, you turn him around on that over the course of one mission.
Are we forgetting about the bomb squad that was on Kingpin's payroll?
All of this isn't surprising, because Spidey functionally is a cop. His superheroics consist entirely of beating up mostly street-level thugs and leaving them there for the police to arrest. All of this stands in shrill contrast to how the game otherwise portrays him as a working-class person.
I don't see how, because if Peter were to let those criminals go, he would be looking the other way so they don't face consequences, kinda like the big mistake he made that got his uncle killed and made him become a hero. Spider-Man fighting crime and leaving the criminals for the police is not against his character. It would actually betray the core of his character if he did let them go.
If you're not very familiar with class analysis, you may raise an eyebrow at hearing this. Many people's conception of cops is that they simply uphold law and order, so how can they be anti-working class? Well, the order that the police uphold is far from a neutral order. It is a rule of law that hugely advantages the owning class over the working class, because it springs forth from a political system in which the wealthy have a giant amount of undue influence. A rule of law that favors the rights of property over the rights of housing, food, health, or even life.
How can you say this after comparing Spider-Man to the police while showing footage of him at the Feast Center where he helps Aunt May who works there? Where does Spider-Man favor the upper class like what you're saying about the police?
If, for example, a homeless person is camping out on someone's property and the owner calls the police, the homeless person will be removed, possibly even arrested, even though it would probably also have been illegal for them to sleep almost anywhere else.
Okay, and we don't see Peter Parker doing anything like that. All we've seen him do is help a homeless shelter, so we'd have less situations like that.
It is legal for a business to throw out entire landfills of perfectly good food while almost 1 billion people go hungry, only to keep the prices up, but it's not legal for a hungry person to quote-unquote steal food from a dumpster. These are all things that Peter should know very well, since he literally volunteered at a homeless shelter.
I don't see how this is relevant to the overall claim that Spider-Man is a class traitor.
White supremacy is also enshrined in the law, meaning it's way harsher and more consistently enforced for people of color than it is for white people, and that a lot of laws specifically exist to hurt communities of color. Crack cocaine, for instance, is chemically virtually identical to powder cocaine, but because the former is more used by black people, 14 US states have a higher maximum sentence for possession and use of crack cocaine than they do for powder cocaine. I hope I don't have to tell you this anymore, but police are also way more likely to kill black people without so much as a hint that they even did anything wrong. Let's not forget that we're dealing with the literal NYPD in this game. Of course, not all of the law is bad, so not everything the police do is bad. The truth is, though, that the vast majority of police time is not spent on violent crime and keeping people safe, but on enforcing the criminalization of homelessness, protecting capital, harassing people of color for looking suspicious, shooting a worrying number of their own dogs, and driving around aimlessly in circles to give the appearance of being busy. If there is such a thing as a good cop, it is a cop who quits a weekend because he realizes what he signed up for.
None of what was described was ever done by Yuri or Jeff in the game, and if they did use their powers in abusive ways, Spider-Man would stand up to that. If his belief in responsibility isn't evidence enough of that, he stands up against Sable International when they do things just as bad, if not worse in the game.
I'm executing this son of a...
Hey! That's not how we do things! Downtown!
Also, quitting the police force just because their system is flawed is a defeatist mindset. That's not really a solution, that's just giving up. Should people give up on the medical field because medical malpractice occurs, or because the healthcare system is flawed and harms the lower class? If that happened, we'd have no doctors to save people from injuries, diseases, you name it. Likewise, all of the cops quitting would mean we'd have no cops to save us from break-ins, mass shootings, you name it.
If you want to know more about how the involvement of cops makes basically every societal problem worse, I would recommend reading The End of Policing by Alex Fattel. It's probably starting to dawn on you how Spidey is betraying the working class by backing the cops, and how it's not in his own material interest to do so.
Why? Yuri explained to Spider-Man that the only way to keep Fisk in prison for good is to do things by the book.
You know how his lawyers are. This one needs to go by the book.
Come on, Yuri, I've been waiting 8 years for this.
You really want to help? Head to Times Square. Sounds like his guys are trying to keep my backup from reaching the scene.
You got it. Almost there.
If Spider-Man doesn't work with the police, then the case against Wilson Fisk can be botched. This can actually lead to a mistrial or give Fisk more loopholes to escape punishment for his crimes. Fisk running free is incredibly dangerous, and Spider-Man would have to know this from his 8 years of experience. It would be highly irresponsible for him not to do what we did to get Fisk arrested and for his properties to be investigated.
Spidey loses his apartment in the game because the law allows landlords to charge people for the basic need of housing. To charge them for nothing but the hard work of owning a building and maybe sending someone every once in a while to do the repairs that landlords are legally responsible for. Even though if we didn't allow that, we could solve homelessness instantly, since in pretty much every capitalist country there are more empty homes than there are homeless people. The law has determined that someone's right to their property, no matter how much of it they have and no matter how they use it, is more important than people's right to live a dignified existence, or indeed survive at all. If Peter chose to defy those warped, unjust priorities by, say, refusing to leave his apartment, guess who would show up to uphold law and order? And guess whose side they would be on.
I don't know what this has to do with Spider-Man, considering his solution isn't to throw these people in jail. His solution is to bring them into a homeless shelter like Feast. Spider-Man can work with the police, but not agree with all of their methods, like how the police can work with Spider-Man and not agree with all of his methods.
I don't approve of your methods, but we're just gonna have to agree to disagree.
Spider-Man working with people like Jeff and Yuri isn't about validating everything cops do, it's about prioritizing what is safer for the city. It's similar to how he works with Silver Sable, despite making it very clear that he doesn't support her methods at all.
I don't like you, you don't like me. But Lee has your client inside this building right now, and he's gonna kill him if we don't do something. We could fight each other, or we could fight Lee, but not both.
I also think Spider-Man isn't incapable of understanding nuance, so he would understand why people like Yuri or Jeff would become police officers. It's pretty obvious that their interests are in helping their communities. Yuri has had her career focused on crime bosses, and Jeff's final act was to shield people from a terrorist bombing. Yeah, there are laws out there that aren't beneficial or fair to citizens, but not only is that not in their control since they're police officers and not lawmakers, there are laws out there that do need to be upheld for society to function on a basic level, such as laws against murder. This would be especially important in a city with lots of crime and supervillains. If we had no police at all in the city, anyone can start a mass shooting, and nobody could stop them, unless they happen to have a gun on them, which most New Yorkers don't even have, statistically speaking. All it takes is one person with nobody prepared to stop it. So, I'm gonna be blunt here, removing all police officers in New York City would be a terrible solution to this issue. This would only allow for more criminals to harm people, creating more Uncle Ben tragedies because we've decided not to have a system in place to stop them. Spider-Man wouldn't support that.
Part 3. Judicial Whack-a-Mole. Let's not mince words. Cops are violent. In fact, threatening or committing violent deeds is the main goal of their existence. Even the most bootlicking cop lover probably can tell you that cops do not commit violent acts. The idea, however, is that the violence that cops do is justified. One important justification behind the kind of repressive justice that the police enact is that it will act as a deterrent to other criminals, and thereby reduce crime. The problem with this is that it simply doesn't work that way.
Okay, but what's the plan if someone has a gun and they break into your house? Or there's a mass shooter and nobody has a gun to stop them, or if there's a child predator and you have an opportunity to report it. You see how it doesn't really make sense to imply that policing as a concept wouldn't reduce crime? That's not to say it justifies wrongful acts of violence or misuses of their power, but it justifies the concept of law enforcement.
The wonderful thing about Spider-Man PS4 is that it, in spite of how propagandistic it otherwise is, unintentionally agrees that repressive justice does not work. As I said earlier, you start the game by sending mob boss Wilson Fisk to jail, after which a bunch of street-level thugs immediately crawl out of the woodwork to fill the vacuum he left behind. Defeat them, and not long after that, Mr. Negative's gang members are committing violent crimes all over Manhattan. Not long after that, you'll be fighting escaped Rikers inmates throughout the city, and if you finish the game having stopped all crimes, the low-level thugs from the start of the game will pop up again to commit more. Again, I get why this was done from a gameplay perspective, to keep the player busy throughout the entire game, but it does give you the distinct impression that Spidey and the cops playing whack-a-mole with criminals doesn't accomplish a whole lot, which is unintentionally a pretty good mirror to the good that police work actually does in real life. Just as in the game, in real life, more police doesn't actually result in a reduction of crime.
Okay, but no policing would result in the Sinister Six roaming free. We saw the consequences of that when they broke out of the raft, and once they were arrested again, the city was on a path to stabilization. I mean, why do you think it was part of Otto's plan to go after the police stations? It's because it would make his job as the supervillain much easier.
The only thing that reliably reduces serious crimes is improving people's standards of living.
Which is what Peter tries doing.
Turns out most people have to be pretty desperate before they commit any serious crimes.
And if one person did it for the love of the game, they could commit a catastrophe if there's no form of law enforcement to stop them. That's just one person. Now imagine like 50 of them.
Chanting for more blue on the street may win you some votes by appearing to be tough on crime, but if you actually care about reducing violent crime, which has been in decline for decades in the global Northwest, by the by, long before the modern trend of police militarization, then you would invest in a solid social safety net, which actually costs less money than operating a giant surveillance and repression apparatus and an overcrowded prison system.
I agree. There should be more investment in a social safety net. Peter agrees with this because he helps out at the Feast Center. The game presents this as the right thing to do, rather than punishing people for being homeless.
Speaking of prisons, yeah, the same thing is true for those. It may satiate some people's hunger for retribution to lock people up for decades under absolutely inhumane conditions, but if you actually care about keeping people safe, you might look towards countries with more humane and rehabilitation-focused penitentiary systems, because they have far lower recidivism and lower crime overall.
Where does Spider-Man support prisons with inhumane conditions? Spider-Man believes in rehabilitation as well. That's why he doesn't kill anyone.
Speaking of absolutely inhumane conditions, during the course of the game, a bunch of inmates are broken out of Rikers, a New York prison that has been described as a human rights atrocity and looking like a slave ship. But you can actually hear escaped Rikers convicts in the game lamenting how it wasn't actually that bad in prison, how they at least got 3 hots and a cot in there, and how that may be preferable to their situation after they escaped, so it can't be that bad, right?
Those are a select number of inmates, so this doesn't prove that the prison isn't prone to inhumane treatment. You also hear inmates say that they're fighting for their freedom, and even compare themselves to the Founding Fathers who were under tyranny. Select experiences don't speak for the rest. Also, Spider-Man directly comments on how reckless the prison is to hold rocket launchers here.
Who thought it was a good idea to bring rockets into a prison?
Doesn't sound like to me the game wants you to believe that Rikers is this great place.
And hey, they all behave like crazed maniacs and immediately take over the city, so they must deserve to be in there, right? It's not like this game takes place in a country where you can get years upon years for, say, non-violent drug crimes, is it? It's not like people of color are disproportionately locked up over there and locked up for way longer, right? It's not like they made these prisoners a lot more racially diverse, read whiter, than they are in real life, right? So Spidey must be the good guy when he's helping send them all back to their human rights atrocity of a prison, right? Right?
So, what do you want Spider-Man to do? Do you want him to let the Rikers escapees just run on the streets? Because that's the same exact mistake that got Uncle Ben killed. Just because the prison system has problems doesn't mean you should let people off for their crimes. You should opt for improving the system.
Part 4. With great power comes no accountability. Yes, I am proud of that line. Spider-Man PS4 has the rare honor of calling something Orwellian and having me agree with it. A character in the game says this in reference to the so-called crime monitoring system that's being used by the NYPD, which basically consists of a bunch of towers on top of police stations throughout the city that are being used to track down crimes, which I can only presume means they're doing some serious mass surveillance on the New York populace, basically listening in on everyone in case they're doing a crime.
That's not what the game shows us. When you're prompted to fix the towers, if you don't immediately try fixing it and listen closely, you can actually hear reports in the background voiced by cops, basically outlining specific crimes that are going on. All we see the towers do after that is display the location of the reported crime. It simply creates an alert system based on civilian reports and marks it on the GPS. This is directly shown when Spider-Man is alerted of a robbery from that same system.
So you're the snitch.
Back off, creep!
If they were actually listening in on everyone, she wouldn't have to snitch on them. They would just know.
So it sounds like I'm agreeing with the game here, right? It's presumably making a statement against sweeping powers for the police to commit mass surveillance on citizens, something I can surely only agree with. Well, not quite. The person making these remarks is none other than J. Jonah Jameson, who in this game is transformed into an Alex Jones kind of type, mouthpiece for extravagant conspiracy theories, who's continuously slandering Spider-Man and basically saying anything he can to drum up fear to get people to listen to his podcast and buy his merch. Having him be the person to make these remarks communicates that they're obviously completely deranged as far as the game is concerned. Truly, a great argument for more police power. I say, maybe the police shouldn't have sweeping powers of mass surveillance. The game says, and I'm left destroyed by facts and logic.
Well, it's not mass surveillance if this place is built around civilian reports, so that's not the game ridiculing the criticism of mass surveillance and privacy violation.
This all becomes a bit awkward when later on in the game it does kind of challenge the idea of unlimited power for the police, while also really trying to make it clear that it isn't actually what they're doing, because video game publishers are cowards who are afraid of making any statement whatsoever. Partly through the game, Norman Osborn, mayor of New York, responds to a supervillain-led crime wave. Again, in the real world, US violent crime has gone down steadily since the 90s and broadly throughout its whole history, by hiring a private military firm called Sable to patrol the streets and keep the peace. This, of course, immediately backfires. They perform mass arrests on peaceful protesters, they extrajudicially lock people up for basically no reason, they erect watchtowers along the city, they confiscate people's possessions just because they want to, and they're not even that good at catching criminals. They're private military super cops, and for once, Spider-Man actually takes a stance against that shit.
He took a stand on the bomb squad that was on Fisk's payroll. This also kinda goes against the whole narrative.
Sabotaging the activities of Sable becomes something you can do throughout Manhattan, and the game actually labels them as crimes. So again, seems like the game is taking a stance against police militarization, right? Having a heavily militarized police force with sweeping powers patrolling the streets leads to flagrant abuses of power, as this game neatly demonstrates. Yes? Well, again, not quite. Because the game really wants you to know that these Sable agents are not cops, and will frequently remind you of the differences between the two. The Twitter feed you can read throughout the game, yes, there's a Twitter feed in the game, shows New Yorkers criticizing the Sable agents, but never the police, and many of them will actively suggest the cops as an alternative to Sable, keeping it vague whether the powers or the people wielding them are the problem.
You should try to show examples of this because I don't know what you're talking about. I took a look for myself and we literally see the same thing done to Spider-Man, where they say the cops should be doing the job. I also couldn't find anything on the cops being suggested as an alternative to Sable, so unless I missed something, I'm not sure where this is coming from.
Of course, the game also conveniently establishes a scenario in which these powers themselves might seem justified, which, again,
I don't know why this crime graph keeps being shown. This is irrelevant at best. This is a universe where Spider-Man and his supervillains exist, and the Avengers, and Doctor Strange. This is not comparable to real life.
At one point in the game, if you listen for it, you can hear one Sable agent saying to another how they can basically get away with anything, because they have no badge or ID number. The implication, of course, is that police do have those things, and can therefore be held accountable.
The implication is that it's easier for them to do, not that the police can't get away with anything either. This literally happens with the bomb squad, who has for a while gotten away with working for Fisk.
If you think cops being afraid of accountability is realistic in the year of our Lord 2022, then I've got more to explain to you than I have time for in this video. Suffice it to say that cops being held accountable for the atrocities they commit is the very rare exception to the norm. Sable agents drive tanks through the city, whereas the cops drive regular old cop cars, but in real life, US police forces can and very often do use military equipment and vehicles, bought at a discount from the US Armed Forces.
Yeah, and one of these involves rocket launchers that get stolen at the prison, which Spider-Man calls out as a bad thing, and Sable International is the replacement for the military, so there's no need to provide the police with more resources. Norman wants Sable International to maintain his agenda with Devil's Breath so that no outside parties interfere.
The thing where Sable agents just take people's property for no reason? Yeah, that's a real thing that cops do, called civil forfeiture, a legalized shakedown tactic that accounted for almost $4.5 billion of the Justice and Treasury Department's budgets in 2015. But you wouldn't know that from playing this game, which constantly valorizes the actual cops.
You would know this because many of them worked for Fisk. Fisk was such a problem for them because of police corruption, not to mention the courts.
As we have seen, the police can do very little to actually reduce crime, because they can't actually address any of the root causes. The game tries to have Spider-Man do a little more than just beating up criminals to help the city, but those attempts largely fall flat, because Spider-Man 2 fails to consider any kind of response to systemic problems, instead focusing on alleviating a few individual problems. Take homelessness, for example, a problem that could be solved by just giving the homeless one of the empty houses that outnumber them, a problem no truly advanced society should have. What does Peter do about this problem? He volunteers at the homeless shelter that's run by his aunt. Which is a cool thing to do, don't get me wrong, but focusing on this kind of thing helps obfuscate where the responsibility really lies for solving homelessness.
Peter doesn't have the power to bring these people into those empty homes. The best he can do is contribute to a homeless shelter so they have a chance later down the line to find their own homes. It's not an immediate process, as these things can take a while.
It gives the false impression that charity alone can make sure nobody has to sleep on the street, and it never shows any of the ways in which homelessness is effectively criminalized.
Well, this isn't a game about homelessness and how to defeat it, so I don't see the reason to focus so much on this.
I'd like this game a whole lot more if Spidey could, say, help homeless people who are being chased by cops for the crimes of sleeping and stealing from dumpsters, or if he could help in stopping evictions.
What exactly would Spider-Man do? Because these homeless people need a home and he needs to drop them off somewhere. The only thing I could see him doing is directing them to a shelter.
Have you got somewhere to go?
I can take care of myself.
I'm sure you can, but just in case, there's a place called the Feast Center.
Seen it. I don't want charity.
They got the best wheat cakes in the city, hands down.
Mom used to make those. Haven't had any in a long time. I'll check it out. Thanks, Spider Guy.
Well, look at that. He gave this person a way to experience Aunt May's wheat cakes. So he does help homeless people find shelter instead of turning them in for technically sleeping where they're not supposed to sleep.
It wouldn't be very realistic for him to oust the mayor and seize all empty properties, but he could be helping in ways that don't obscure the roles that the government and the police play in keeping people homeless.
Then give an example of what he could do that he doesn't or wouldn't in the game.
The game offers a similarly half-baked, individualistic, liberal solution to environmental issues. Oscorp, the corporation headed up by current mayor Norman Osborn, is causing all kinds of environmental damage throughout the city. Luckily, Osborn's son Harry has set up a bunch of research stations around the city, researching ways to monitor and undo this damage. All Spidey has to do is use these stations to find the sources of pollution, a few bad exhausts for example, or a few places where water is being polluted, and the problems are gone. In doing this, Spidey convinces the Oscorp board that Harry's research is worthwhile, which might mean that pollution won't be as bad in the future. So apparently, all we have to do to stop companies from polluting is appealing to their better nature? Hoping that environmentalism is actually more profitable? Maybe getting a better CEO at the top? This is of course gibberish. Shareholders are the ones who ultimately determine the course of a company, and they always prioritize short-term gains over environmental impact. They won't do anything to stop their own pollution unless they're forced to.
Harry says that Oscorp wants the research stations to fail because they might show that they're polluting. He's not trying to appeal to the company or its CEO. He plans to show this evidence to the Department of Environmental Protection to prevent a public health crisis. He literally forces them to face consequences for this.
I think Oscorp wants this to fail because it might show they're polluting.
The amount of polycyclic hydrocarbons in the air is way too high. And rising. If it keeps getting worse, people could die. Best smokestack picture I ever took. The Department of Environmental Protection will take it from here. Maybe I should make a green spider costume for Earth Day.
You might also have noticed that the kinds of pollution the game talks about are all very minor, things Spider-Man can fix in a single afternoon. Larger, more long-term problems, like, say, the oncoming climate apocalypse, are never even mentioned.
These sources of pollution contribute to this, and Peter literally says this would have prevented a public health crisis. So, how is that very minor?
I'd say the game also propagates such an individual-focused, non-systemic, non-solution to the problem of bad cops, since it does portray a few cops at the beginning of the game as corrupt, being on Fisk's payroll and turning against Spider-Man when he goes to confront the mob boss. That's really the worst criticism this game gives cops. There's a few bad apples, as police representatives love to say when yet another cop commits a completely unprovoked murder. In reality, the problem isn't a few bad apples. It's that all the other apples form a wall of silence around the bad apples to make sure they never get convicted, and the role Apple unions play in protecting the bad apples, and the role that the entire Apple organization serves in oppressing minorities and the working class.
How do you think these cops weren't caught doing this for 8 years while Fisk was being investigated by Spider-Man? It's because of the exact thing you just said cops do to protect corrupt cops.
We should also consider the fact that a job that allows you to establish your authority over others with little to no accountability naturally attracts people with authoritarian personalities and fantasies. So no, getting rid of the bad apples as they go bad won't do a whole lot.
Then what should be done? Because the alternative is to either let them off or just abolish policing, either of which are worse.
The point is not to feel bad about your enjoyment of a Spider-Man game, I mostly enjoyed it myself, but to be better able to spot Copaganda when we see it in other media. Because if we want to keep ourselves from internalizing certain questionable ideas, we first need to be able to recognize them. If we don't, we can never move beyond them.
The part that loses me in this video is that I haven't seen a questionable idea presented from the game. The game firmly stands against abuses of power and portrays holding abusers accountable as the right thing to do. Even for Yuri, when Spider-Man says she needs to turn herself in and he will fight her if she doesn't.
You can't kill people, Yuri!
Apparently I can. And you know what? It felt good.
You need to turn yourself in.
For what? I just dispensed justice. True justice. And I restored a little bit of balance to the world.
You're my friend, Yuri. I don't want to come after you.
You do what you have to do, and I'll do what I have to do.
Spider-Man firmly supports helping the homeless instead of locking them up. Spider-Man works with the police when it benefits the city, not to act as if they're pure and without flaw. He will take a stand if they do something wrong. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. Hope you enjoyed watching, let me know your thoughts below. Subscribe if you want more of this content. See you later.